So good afternoon, everybody, and very warm welcome to the second CI Forum of Fall 2020. As you all know, the topic is the normal, the abnormal, and the new normal. And today we have, I'm very, very delighted to announce that today we have with us another very special guest, Professor Firdous Azim, Chair of Department of English at BRAC University, who is one of the finest scholars from our country on post-colonialism and feminism, and who also happened to be my teacher. But of course, she is so much more than that. And to introduce her to you, I would invite Professor, our very own Dean of Arts and Humanities, Professor Kaysar Haq. Sir, over to you.
Thank you, Tabassum. Thanks to everyone who has had a role in organizing this event. It's something that we've been doing for some time, and a lot of credit goes to Tabassum for right from the beginning. Actually, you brought this idea over from MSJ to our department, and we have since had a number of very fruitful sessions in which students and faculty members participated and discussed something of general significance in relation, which they could then relate to their course of studies. And it's a particular delight to welcome my old friend Firdous Azim. We go back to 1970. I think in 1970, Firdous went up to Dhaka University. 1 year after me, we had just gone up in 1969 and started the movement. And all of us were taking to the streets between classes, I remember. And then we became teachers at the department. Then both of us were Commonwealth scholars in England. I at Warwick, Firdous at Sussex. I think we just overlapped a bit. And she has done marvelous work, as Tabassum has mentioned, in post-colonial studies and gender studies. And as not only as a theoretician and a critic, but also as an activist. See, she has made tremendous contributions to the social and cultural life of this country. And we were a bit cut up when she left Dhaka University because we were colleagues there. And she went and joined BRAC. And we felt that, well, I mean, we were losing one of our own, you see, but in our field, you see, one never loses anyone. Connections are always maintained. And even after she moved to BRAC, we have kept up friendship and professional connection as well. Many of us at ULAB have taught at BRAC. And from BRAC 2, we have had a lot of sort of interaction with ULAB, and I hope that I think this is a visit after a pretty long time to ULAB for Firdous. And I'm glad that you have braved the pandemic to visit us virtually. And once it's over, I hope that you will be with us again in person on our different occasions, and we hope to see you on stage at ULAB, participating in the different discourses that we organize from time to time. Anyway, but it's a great delight. Without further ado, let me hand the microphone back to Tabassum so that you can continue with the procedure of getting on with the event, and we'll all look forward to hearing Firdous on this very interesting topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for the wonderful words. And now, without further ado, I will hand it over to Firdous ma'am to start right away.
Hello, everybody. It's always a delight for me to be in ULAB, you know, because as Kasser just said, a lot of you have been at Dhaka University with me, then at BRAC University with me, and are now at ULAB. So it's like a home away from home. It's like, Dhaka University is becoming a bit alien with new people, and all the old people seem to have gathered for me at ULAB. So it's always very nice, and I've always loved your discussions, your seminars, etc., because they've been very well organized and very well thought out. And I'm always happy and proud to be a part of that. Thank you, Kasser, for your wonderful introduction. And the friendship that goes, I don't know how many years, it's like 50 years now, I think, if it's 1970, then yeah. But also that we are supposed to be working on our thing together, of which you're the editor. And I'll take this opportunity to say that I haven't even started thinking about the article. But anyway, this is between you and me, and we can discuss this later. But when Tabassum called me and she told me the title, my first reaction was to say no. Firstly, I didn't know what integration meant. And secondly, when I heard the normal, the abnormal, and the new normal, I thought, look, I don't believe in the normal. And the word normal kind of brings out the issue of norms. And norms are discussed in subjects in disciplines like psychology or anthropology and sociology when they are being empirical, when they are being instrumental, not when they are being critical. So I thought about it, and I thought, no, let me talk about literature. Let me talk about how norms are established and how norms are broken, and how the new normal, of course, this is the new normal now. We refer to our virtual meetings and our masks as the new normal. But the new normal is constructed in many, many ways, and in many, through many forms of protest, through many forms of challenge, through many forms of subversion, through many forms of transgression. So as we think about these issues, I was also thinking about how I could pitch my talk. And as I've been introduced as a feminist and a post-colonialist, I will use both these angles, both these perspectives to enter into the discussion of the normal and the abnormal. And let's see how the new normal pans itself out. While I was waiting for 3 o'clock to begin, I was just browsing through the thing, through the internet, and it's all about Trump. And if Trump is defining the new normal, it's a mad normal, right? So it's abnormal is the new normal, however we define it. So anyway, when thinking about this topic, I was led to the Enlightenment era, and looking at that time as when Europe was grappling with defining the parameters of state, society, and what it meant to be a citizen of the polities that were coming into being at that juncture. And of course, thinking of 18th century Europe leads everyone to think of the famous theoretician philosopher Michel Foucault, who crucially drew our attention to the discursive nature of truth, what we may term norms. I'm using his word for truth to mean the norms that were set up. And this act of bringing into discourse, into language, into enunciation, which creates structures of knowledge and organizes and crucially governs human lives. So it is a construction, and it is a discursive construction. These structures, as Foucault goes on to point out, are absolutely invested with power, and forms of governance and governmentality are associated with it. It is while exploring the ways in which these structures are set up during that era that Foucault becomes a historian of the abnormal. Thus, in his seminal work, The History of Sexuality, Foucault concentrates on the repressive hypothesis, or how sexuality was domesticated by leaving outside its fold, or the fold of the normal, the homosexual, childhood sexuality, and even female sexuality. So female desire, female longing is considered abnormal in the new normal that the 18th century set up. These left out arenas then became the subject of the newly emerging professions of psychiatry, of criminology, of disease, or the medical professions, and delinquency per se. Foucault's historical project thus concentrates on the madman, the criminal, the sick, and the so-called sexually deviant. It is through the abnormal that the normal comes into view, and it is through the many forms of governmentality that these norms are kept in place. The coercive, repressive aspects become clear as power plays a part in the creation of the epistemological discourse that structures and governs our lives. So this is how the 18th century structural setting up can be viewed. We can then look at this time, this historical juncture, to look at the left out arenas as defined by Foucault and how they jostle to be included. And of course, as a feminist, I will turn to feminist discourse. Mary Wollstonecraft becomes a very good writer to turn to at this point. Out of the foment and the ferment of Enlightenment thinking and 18th century political revolutions, be it the American Act of War of Independence or the French Revolution, and the firm basis of the concept of equality or the romanticizing of the noble savage were two categories of human beings which remained firmly outside it. And these were the slaves or Black people and women. Now I'm talking people who were within Europe or America at that time. So slaves were not part of this discourse, neither were women. And Wollstonecraft then begins by writing a vindication of the rights of man in 1790 and follows it up by the vindication of the rights of woman 4 years later. So on reading that tome today, one is struck by the appeal that Wollstonecraft makes to and behalf of women. The vindication appeals to women to be rational, to eschew the heart for the head. And she castigates women and literature as a whole for the writing of trashy novels which inculcate in women a romantic twist of the mind, in quotes. So this absolutely is against the romantic assertion which is to come about 6 years later of the spontaneous overflow of powerful emotions. That spontaneous overflow of powerful emotions does not seem to refer to women. Women are supposed to be calm, collected, rational, and reasonable, to be self-governing. What is revolutionary about Mary Wollstonecraft is that she takes the control over women out of the patriarchal order, but the issue of governance and control remains firmly held in place. But the onus is now on women to train our emotions, ourselves, to be fit and rational citizen subjects. So this new order that had come into being with the revolutions, this new citizen subject, this equality and liberty is within certain confines, within certain boundaries. And because it is a fraternity, women have to struggle even harder to become a part of that fraternity, to be included within the parameters or the boundaries of the state that is being set up. So now literature is not the domain, as I started by saying, where norms and governmentality are established, but the space where there's a lack of control or a slackening of control, where the imagination and emotion are supposed to take over. So the Wordsworthian romantic appeal to the emotion and the imagination, coupled with the celebration of man in nature, harkens to a sphere outside the realms of societal control and remains, and romantic poets take the opportunity to explore these parts of the human mind or psyche that lies outside our ken. So we are exploring what lies outside the structures that have been delineated as the markers of being human. In this context, the image of the poet drawn by Coleridge with flashing eyes and floating hair, who had drunk the milk of paradise, breaks all ideas of norms and gestures to a creativity which is dangerous. Beware, beware. This boldness of vision and breaking of norms is something that female thinkers are always wary of, given the fact that the madwoman will easily be confined to the attic. And as I was thinking about this yesterday, I just saw this program in Al Jazeera quite by chance, and it was beautiful. It was about this woman called May Ziad, who apparently was a lover or an admirer of Khalil Gibran. And she was a huge poet in her own right, but her poetry has never been found. And in fact, she was locked up in a lunatic asylum by her family members, not for being a poet, but for inheriting a lot of property, I think. But you know, like women are, what should I say, labeled as mad, labeled as insane, and then locked up somewhere. So any deviation from what has been set out as the norm, what has been set out as the parameters amongst which we are to operate, and that becomes a huge issue in women's lives. So even in the pages of literature, the image of the mad woman, the one who breaks norms, gives way to her emotions, allows her desires to hold sway, is castigated, is expelled from society. Thus, the mad woman in the attic functions just as her mad laughter that rings through the silence of Thornfield Hall as a warning and cautionary signal to all women, including women writers. So Charlotte Bronte's image of Bertha Mason, of Bertha Mason's madness, of uncontrolled sexuality, of uncontrolled rage and anger is something that affects even the woman writer. I'm sure our imagination, the reader's imagination, is peopled with tragic heroines right from the start, beginning with Clytemnestra and down to Anna Karenina and even Bimola of our Ghore Baire. So any stepping outside the very strict boundaries that have been set for us means disaster and expulsion and tragedy. So going on, this early modern era, that is the 18th century, had established the public-private divide in gender terms, as Foucault has also pointed out in the history of sexuality. What's wonderful is that he defines the architecture of the house to show how homes are made to divide the various functions of each member of the family, and then how within the homes we grow up knowing what is our place, position. As you know, he's done that with the architecture of the penal system, but even in every aspect of our lives is designed and structured in very physical terms. The pages of the 18th and 19th century English novel are concerned with the individual in struggle with established boundaries and norms. We've been looking at very fraught relations women had with these structures. But these norms are also visualized in terms of other subjectivities, which form for these writers a kind of fascination and wonderment which can only end in tragedy. And here I will bring in the position of the other man maybe. I tend to look at Afraben at this point, Afraben's Oronuko, perhaps written before Foucault, the time Foucault was examining. and how she looks as an observer, but with fascination at Orinoco, who's a Black slave in Suriname, how she sympathizes with his rebellion up to a certain extent, but withdraws at the last moment because she knows that this is a challenge to the established order of things. The other novel we all know a lot is Wuthering Heights, in which the other, Heathcliff, is brought into the boundaries of established society, and Catherine's desire and love for him results in tragedy. Now, in both novels, I think the writers very carefully use a kind of narrative device to keep themselves separate from the narration. Afra Ben wrote Roma a Clef, autobiographical novels, where the writer is very visibly present in the narrative. But in Orinoco, she is very carefully positioning herself as an observer outside the story, not as an actor within the story. So it becomes nearly an anthropological eye looking in at the other. In Wuthering Heights, I think Emily Bronte has used layers of narrative voices to distance the story so that the display of desire, of love and revenge can be viewed from that distance that gives us a critical eye. These writers do not seem to be able to enmesh themselves in the story or to enmesh themselves in a way that would make that madness, that desire recognizable as female and as pertaining to all women. Okay, so Madness and Civilization is the title of one of Foucault's books, we know. Foucault is famously or infamously supposed to have said that the world is Europe, and the civilization that he pictures and characterizes and explores is very Eurocentric. But as students of English literature, we had to wait for the writings of Edward Said, and perhaps not really that this can be contended, to show us how European civilizational discourse, through its world-conquering colonial project, continues to dominate, so that the othering processes that colonialism set into being still pervades and still prevails over discourses of world literature, of literary writing, of discussing literature even today. And though we are sitting in a department of English and discussing literature, we obviously are doing that, but I contend that all literatures have gone through this process that Said describes of colonial discourse, influence, etc., by which othering influences enter. We continue to talk about madness and civilization. The next thinker or the train of thought that I want to turn to is Sigmund Freud. Psychoanalysis, from the moment of its inception in the early part of the 20th century, has tried to delve into the unexplored arenas of the human mind, of the unconscious, and to understand what we broadly term as madness. In its examination of the human child's growth into subjectivity and into gendered subjectivity, repression again becomes the hallmark, becomes the key word, as the human child is made to take up its gendered position. Without going into the details of the castration or the Oedipal complexes, what the unconscious mind, Freud shows us in this process of child development, is a morass of undifferentiated material and uncensored desire, which in its progress towards subjectivity has to be repressed and censored. Freud's essays, and rather than his tomes of writing, I love his small essays, provide nuggets through which to explore the relationship between the creative self, and the unconscious mind. In the essay Family Romances, for example, Freud shows how this oscillation between the mother, or the body of the mother, and the father, or the patriarchal order in which the child resides, this places the child in a place of eternal lack and longing. And here we are talking about both men and women. And then the task of literature is really, or the task of the artist is to bring out this material, to make it come out and make it function in a way that we can understand. So his other essay that I would like you to draw your attention to, little essays, little snippets, is Creative Writers and Daydreaming. And he associates the mind of the writer and the dream world together. But just as in the dream world, our access to the unconscious is through the sublimation of art and through dreams. And just as the dream world does not speak in a direct manner, but in symbols and metaphors, in repetitions, etc., these things become the elements of art itself. And when we come to modernism, from that great 18th, 19th century to the early 20th century, we will see how this fragmented, dissociated, broken aspect of the human psyche, there's an effort to reflect it in art. So what we had been seeing in Wordsworth or in Dickens or whoever is, we were looking for a wholeness, to see how the character develops. We were trying to see the child as the father of the man, and we were trying to see connections. But now we are in the world of disconnections, where connections cannot be made, where, Foster has to say only connect because he cannot connect. And these insights, as we see, have had great influence on writers and artists, beginning with experiments in artistic abstraction from Cubism to Expressionism. The effort was to go beyond the surface reality and to look at the elements that compose that reality and to look at the fragmented nature of that composition. In literature, we have eschewed social realism at this stage, and we have come to an exploration of the human psyche, which is, best expressed or, known to be expressed through the stream of consciousness method. So we're not looking for 1 + 1 = 2, but for 1 + 1 = 0, maybe, to abstractions of the highest order. So madness or deviation from the norm becomes the norm as these arenas are explored. So the normal and the abnormal, the vibhajan, the division between the two doesn't work anymore. So a potent theme of exploration or research could at this point be the status of the woman writer. How are women who have formed for the literary imagination the place of the other, the place of the irrational from which deviance from norms can be examined, placed in modernism? How do they appear in modernist literature? The most celebrated modernist female expression is made by a man, and that is Molly Bloom's soliloquy in Ulysses. Both in subject matter and style, the soliloquy is stunning. But the question that remains is whether women are freer in any way than hitherto, are they still bound within the tight grasp of normality, which grips us tighter, which grips women tighter, even in art, than before. So this period of high modernism throws up few women writers, Virginia Woolf being the most celebrated among them. While she explores the relationship between female creativity and madness, her very deliberate style does not betoken an arena of freedom, but of artistic, stylistic control. She's a very controlled writer. She doesn't go on to, expatiate on women's freedom. And I somehow feel that her very stylistic approach to writing forms another form of control over women's writing capacities. I would rather turn to somebody else, that is Jean Rhys, who in a person combines the qualities of the mad Bertha Mason, as we had seen, and as she writes about in White Cigar Souci. But what she does is transfuse the feminine form of the modern, and she uses the figure of the flaneuse, the woman roaming the streets of modern cities such as London and Paris. And these women live in a very unsure, slipping into sex work, coming out and becoming dancers and artists. And she allows herself to explore various arenas of female sexuality. So this very uncertain sexual positioning of her heroines as they flit between them then opens up a terrain for the examination of female sexuality in a manner that the romances of D.H. Lawrence would perhaps not even recognize. We know that D.H. Lawrence is celebrated in literature as the person, as the writer who opened up the arena of sexuality to a fabulous examination. But to him, we know that this man-woman relationship, as we were always taught, a man-woman relationship rather than this, is very much dependent on this, on women's passivity, on women's control, on women's surrender to male passion. I would really like to end by talking about the novels of Doris Lessing, especially her Golden Notebook, because I think Doris Lessing combines all the elements of post-colonialism other and the feminine other, that the exclusion of which categories forms the dominant norm. And in her Martha Quest novels, she explores the growth and development of Martha Quest in colonial Zimbabwe and South Africa. But it is in her novel, her first novel, The Grass is Singing, that she looks at female desire and a woman's desire for a Black servant. And in this play of sexuality and violence and racism and denial are all the aspects that Western civilization and those civilizations that have been colonized would like to keep outside the purview of examination. The only other writer, I think, who does this with as much passion and involvement is Arundhati Rai in the God of Small Things, where she takes up the caste system, the class system, to look at to open up these very impossible realms where we are not supposed to stray, where we are not supposed to go. If you were to change the gender positions, you could see it would be very easy. But where a woman becomes the protagonist, it becomes a very, very difficult terrain to be in. To go on to then look at the Golden Notebook. The Golden Notebook I would uphold for everybody, not just studying feminism, but for studying norms, for studying what is what in the mid-20th century, and I don't know whether this goes on to today, is the story of a woman writer, Anna Wolf. And Anna Wolf, as she struggles with writing, as she struggles with being a mother, as she struggles with being, and her chapters are called Free Women, Free Woman 1, Free Women 2, and being a free single woman of being communist activist and of then trying to find find a place for herself in this world, and verging on the edge of nervous and mental breakdown. With the Golden Notebook and with the Martha Quest stories, there seems that Doris Lessing then swerves into another world of science and spiritual fiction. It is as though this examination of the female psyche has led her into other worlds. And that is where I stop, because that is where I feel that I cannot go. Maybe it requires another kind of critical eye, another readerly eye to follow into those terrains. Now we are talking about the new normal. And when we talk about the new normal, of course, we are talking about this. So it's a very technological new normal. The new normal will be defined by, and I suppose new normals are always defined by technology, by science, by how we communicate with each other, how we write, how we speak to each other, all of that. The new normal also means donning the mask, wearing the mask. And I feel that this mask wearing and the moral, what should I say, the moral stance that we are all taking on the mask leads me back to the niqab and to the whole burqa dispute. Do we then, is there any way that we can combine these discourses, the discourse of the veil that has been, what should I say, concerning us, that has been something that has been animating feminist discussion across the world. At one level, we've been talking about freedom of expression, and at another level, Macron has been talking about European values, French values. We have been talking about coercion, repression of women. That is why we wear the veil or not. And that, I think, should take you back to our Rokia Sakhawat Hussain, and to, again, a small essay that I like very much called The Burqa, and where she says that it is, the burqa is not the piece of cloth that is important, it is what that piece of cloth signifies. And she goes on to examine the many dimensions of that signification. We know she has written Oborod Bashini, which is the strongest protest against the confinement of women that I have come across. But when the confinement of women and women's dress codes are combined, that again makes us wonder about how women are controlled, what lack of control means, who controls, etc., who sets the norms. But now the norm is back to wearing the niqab for all of us. So with that, I'd like to come to an end. Yes.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I think it was quite a lot for our students. I'm sure they have learned a lot from this, and it has opened up a lot of avenues to discuss it more. So I would like everybody to, if you have any questions, we would, keep the floor open for question answers now. So please write your questions in the chat box, or you can also ask here. And I would also request everybody to be precise. We would like to take as many questions as possible. So do we have any? Let's see.
I think Deep has a question.
We have a big question already from one of our students. Ma'am, can you see the chat box? He has written it here. Do you want me to read it out? It's in the chat box. What do you think?
Mute myself. What do you think should be a possible escape route for a person who gets to know that abnormality of life is the reality and normality is nothing but a suppressive social construction? For instance, a colonizer learns that colonialism is bad and Yeah. Our personal codes of conduct, our personal ethics is something that is very, very difficult. But I think recognizing that the normal and the abnormal are intimately connected, that the abnormal is the normal, and the norms have been created and kept in place, would in the first instance make us more compassionate and make us more aware of other things. There is a story about Freud where a mother brings her gay son to him and says, I want you to cure him. And Freud says that, no, I cannot cure him. I hope he said there's nothing to cure him of, but I can help him to live better with it. So we do not, we do not impose values and norms on others, but we see how those norms are created. Now, when a colonizer realizes that colonization is repressive and suppressive and horrible, and how does he react to it? It's very difficult. And it reminds me of George Orwell's Shooting an Elephant, or his whole book, Burmese Days, in which I think George Orwell is becoming very aware of his place as a police officer in the colonial service. He's aware of the oppression and the alienation that is being imposed on the Burmese people, but he's caught up in a system of governance which he cannot perhaps challenge as much. But I suppose leaving the police service and becoming a writer is his way of doing that. So personal choices have to be made. But I think the first thing that it will do, is not think of norms as existing, as pre-existing, as this is normal, this is abnormal. But I really think the abnormal is the normal. Does that answer your question, Deep?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much.
In my presentation, I try to look at your syllabus, and because Tabassum sent that to me, and try to keep it within that syllabic framework, but I couldn't address everything. It would become another hour long, I think, if I were to do that, but just concentrated on 2 moments, as it were.
So do we have more questions? Questions, please, if you have any. So, ma'am, can we say that, normal is a category that is actually is there to be broken, right? If there is no breaking of normal, there is no really going forward. But all we can do is that to become more informed about what it entails. So maybe that can be a way forward.
I don't know about forward, but I mean, nothing is set in stone, as we say, and things are created to suit certain power structures, to suit certain discursive structures, and there's always a clash. But literature, art, etc., is the place where we can examine those from. We can question those. We don't have to live those, and we don't have to enforce those in any way. Now, of course, it becomes very difficult for me to talk as somebody who's a teacher and who's, establishing norms. These are the norms of your classroom, etc. But yes, they are there to be broken. They are there to be challenged. They're there to be asked about.
Right. So having an open mind, be critical of whatever we are offered is what we can do.
I don't know about an open mind, but a critical mind.
Oh.
Yeah. And the word norm, and my first reaction, if you remember, normal, just, kind of pushes back against that it seems that, you're now putting everybody in a box of normalcy.
Right.
And that is where I love our subject, that we are allowed, that it allows us to open up many avenues of exploration, of criticism, of examination, of analysis. Whereas I think if I was a doctor, I would have to talk about the normal heart and etc., etc. I would have to take a, a stand for normal health, So that's, we are allowed, and that's what the arts does. That's what makes it exciting.
Hello, ma'am.
Hello.
This is Arifa. How are you? Good to see you. Ma'am, I was just wondering, at the end of your presentation, you mentioned how this is like the new normal and referring to the technological aspect of it. But I was just thinking that because as I was listening to your lecture, I am actually in the kitchen. I was peeling potatoes. So I was thinking, so what is the normal? What is supposed to be the new normal? And is this abnormal for me to be, engaged in my professional life and my personal life at the same time? And, and I've had these experiences in the recent months, where a colleague has called me, usually a male, around 8 or 9 p.m. and is surprised, and as if like, what do you think you're doing at this time? When I say that I'm fixing dinner for my kids, and it's like the reaction is like, what, dinner? You should be on your laptop or something. So how do we bring all these aspects together into something that's even a semblance of, I don't know even what to call it, if this is normal or abnormal or a new normal. What do you think?
I think the division of life into work and home, into profession and domestic, it was abnormal. It was something that came up with the Industrial Revolution. It divided the gender roles of the home into the public and the private, etc. With the pandemic and with working from home, this working from home has made work and home come together. So as you're saying that you are fixing dinner at 8 o'clock in the night for your family, and that comes as a big surprise, but it also surprises me that I'm in a meeting at 9 o'clock in the night. I prefer to be that, okay, all the work is done, and therefore we're sitting down to a meeting now. So time, how we allocate our time, how we allocate between work and domestic work, domestic chore and professional work, between leisure and work, just as in this webinar, you can easily, get off, put your microphone and your video off and cook dinner. Nobody will know, but you could be listening at the same time. I think a new way of organizing time, so perhaps a new way of normalcy is coming, but I don't think it is. That's the sad part. I think we're all going to go back to how we were.
I think we have another question. If we should get rid of all these constructs altogether. The idea of normal, like the idea of utopia, is a historical construct. Do you think it's time we got rid of these constructs?
I don't know that I would associate utopia and normalcy together. Utopia is actually a wonderful way of, we're never going to be able to get rid of the normal as well. A new norm will emerge. A new form of constructing our lives will emerge. And utopia will always give us a space from which we can overstep beyond the barriers, beyond the ways that we are limited in our thinking between the normal, in the normal world. So I don't know that utopia and norms go hand in hand, but norms I would love to do away with. So we could have, but utopian thinking, utopian dreams, utopian desires that cannot be fulfilled, but get a space of expression, which I always think is literature. Not as escapism, you know, this might just seem that literature is escapism, but no, another space in which other realities are created, and which perhaps, as Tabassum was saying, gives us a way forward, makes us think of other lands, other spaces.
I mean, it keeps the possibilities alive, other possibilities also, but norms necessarily don't. I think we have more questions. Can abnormal be new normal? Oh, of course.
If the new normal is willing to accept all kinds of utopian thinking, all kinds of mad thinking, of, you know, irrationalities, yes, it could be the new normal. But then the irrationality of a Donald Trump, for example, if that becomes the new normal, that's dangerous. But the irrationality of, I don't know. I mean, I'm just thinking of the new normal as it has defined my life. It has brought me home, something I haven't experienced in a long time. It has made me open my time to gardening, to things like that. If this is the new normal, a kind of Rockian new normal, yes, but not a Donald Trumpian. I don't know exactly what this question means, I think. There's another question from Deep, and I think that if we accept the fact that nothing will ever be normal, there will always be a clash. Do you think gaining the knowledge of this imbalance is the primary evil? No, I don't know what you mean by gaining the knowledge, but let me just say about this clash. Yes, gaining the knowledge, what does that mean?
Ma'am, so what I was trying to say is, it's a really interesting thing that I see with my mother, because my mother is a housewife, and whenever my friends or my cousins talk about that, why you work so hard in the house, like you could have gone out and work and earn, but for her, that is not even a reality or a life that a woman should lead, because my mother thinks that staying at the house, doing all the household works and doing everything for children and husband are the primary things. So this thing that she does is not at all suppressive for her, because she thinks this is how a woman should lead. But a woman who knows that there has to be a balance between work and household chores, they often face the problem of balancing this out. So do you think, in this sense, gaining the knowledge that we need to balance everything between the normal and abnormal is the evil?
Firstly, this clash that you're talking about, to go back to Foucault again, he doesn't see life or the world as progress, right? He sees it as a clash of discourses. And like different discourses are clash, it's a state of war, if you read his essays on power knowledge, and which can gain prominence and dominance. So there is no right or wrong about it. There is nothing good or bad about it. There's a play of power. And all of us, whether we are the woman who thinks that housework is best, or we are the woman who thinks down with housework, I want to be part of this world, we all are struggling to put our views forward. So in that clash of views, in that clash of ideologies, if we call it, or in this clash of discourses, as Foucault would have it, I don't know that there would be a balancing out. There would always be a struggle. There would always be a one-upmanship that I will establish myself. But as it is, discourses of being at home, being at work, being making my home my workplace doesn't depend on individual choice. It depends on systems. So even in this lockdown, even while the lockdown was at its height, garment factories opened. and the woman garment factory worker had to be in her place of work, leave her home to go to her place of work. Now, where is the balancing there? It is a way that systems work. And so when we talk about the new normal as making it work from home, we have to also think of other forms of work, other forms of production, which may make it possible. And that is why I said that I don't know that there will be a new normal, that we will just go back to the old as soon as we can. So I don't know that there is a primary evil, but there's definitely a primary fight. There's a primary clash. There's a primary struggle, and everyone would like to be on top. Let us face it.
More questions for you, ma'am, from
How
Nosheen.
can all new normal be acceptable to everyone? Could you kind of break down that question a bit? Nosheen?
So maybe can we go to the next one?
Rise of industrial realization clashing with nature. Yes, I like this question because, you know, it makes the relationship between 19th century, 18th century romantic thought and today's climate crisis. With the advent of the Industrial Revolution, and we know all those stories about horrible cities being created, about the countryside being destroyed, but what we don't comment on much is about how human lives were reorganized in those times. And when we come to today's climate change crisis, we will have again to put in the human lives which are being reorganized around those lines. Living with nature, what can it mean in the 21st century? How does one start living with nature again? Because we've had 200 or 300 years of the destruction of nature, of taming nature, as we say, to meet human needs. And Amitabh Ghosh is the person who has been grappling with these issues in his novels, beginning with The Hungry Tide, where he talks about tigers versus humans, and even now in The Gun Island, how nature plays a role in our lives. But then how do we learn to live with nature all over again is something that belies my imagination. I really do not see it happening, and I can only think of a very dystopian end of the world. But I'm sure climate thinkers and creative artists can revitalize the nature man versus nature debate and give it new forms and new ways of analysis and being, and create new norms. I mean, even little things like what do we do with our masks has become a topic of conversation, right? So yeah, the nature debate to be brought back more centrally into literature is something that is the demand of the day. That is the task of the writer. That is the task of the thinker, the philosopher, etc. Does that answer your question in any way? Monisha? Monisha is the one who asked this question, so I don't know whether it answered it in any way.
All right, we have another question from Mashur. We are almost towards the end of our session, so we might take just one or two questions most. Okay.
Okay, now this question from Ashur Rahman is, when the system is designed to alienate ourselves with our work and the pandemic is making us mix our public and private, if we do not enjoy the privilege of privacy, will it not have drastic impact on our mental health? Yeah, I'm very optimistic. I feel that this blurring of boundaries between the public and the private, between our public lives and our private lives, bringing our work home, is going to have good effects. We will all have to draw parameters. We will all have to say that I do not work over weekends, or I do not work after 10 o'clock, or I do not work before 12 midday or something. You know, we all have to design our lives in other ways. But I think this working from home is really a new way of looking at the relationship between work and home, between the public and the private. And as somebody, as a feminist, and I know all women, as Arifa said, we have been grappling with the issue of balancing public and private lives, as somebody said about his mother, that to her, her domestic life is her whole life. All these issues we've been grappling with, but now it's all been brought home to all of us, at least in middle class professions, where we have the ability, we have the privilege of working from home. And I think this is time to examine public-private relations a lot more than we have been. And maybe if we continue in this way, our life patterns will change. I went out today to Mohakali on another purpose at 9 o'clock in the morning, at 8:30 in the morning. It took me more than half an hour to reach the place I was going to, not my university. And I thought, oh my God, once university opens, I will have to do all this all over again. But the fact that I don't have to go anywhere, that I just have to open this thing and talk to you and then shut it and then perhaps, you know, go off for a nap or something, or go into the garden or go into the kitchen, that's so wonderful. But I don't know, somebody is talking about mental health. I think it can be very good for your mental health if you organize it. I don't know. I mean, can the new normal? Again. Yes, I think the issue of the normal is created, is constructed. And we know that what is considered normal in one place is considered abnormal in another. So that makes it really clear that it is something that there's consent around it. The thing is that we have to change the discourse to make this issue more, to make the normal more acceptable of what it today calls the abnormal, or what in a particular society is considered abnormal, so that the vista, the horizon opens further. Yes, the media does create. Media is the biggest creator of the normal, and the media can work in so many ways to reinforce what is being suppressed, and to also open up new vistas and horizons. I think of women in sport. One of the things that my activist life began with was about women playing football. And when I think of the Bangladesh women's football team, I think, yes, the normal, what is doable changes, concepts change. And making this change happen, allowing this change to happen is the struggle. Do you think this new normal has normalized science enlightenment all over again? That's from Shamshad. What do we think? Well, I think technology is, and technology and science are taking such a front seat that I don't know whether they are the determinants of the new normal, but they're definitely instrumental in what people like you, writers, etc., are going to determine is the new normal. Because without the technology, without the science, this new world that we are inhabiting, and I think we are at the threshold of, would not be possible. So yes, science is playing a huge role. I don't know what is happening to issues, to spiritual and religious issues here, whether they are in clash or whether they're in tandem, but we seem to be back to the brave new world of the early 20th century of modernism. Shamshad,
Yeah,
do you agree? Do you agree?
I was actually thinking of Donald Trump and his debate with Fauci. So the way he kept on denying science, so with the bleaching powder and all that, because all the remedies that he was, and at what point, it seemed, this was a debate between science, like rationality and irrationality. So that, and when you think of virus as something entering our body, so it could be a national body, a personal body, or a social body. So the normal reaction is to have an antibody. And what this pandemic has done, so we have somehow normalized the idea that you can separate and isolate yourself and distance yourself from the social body. So the self-isolation, and that in a way has helped Trump's nationalistic agenda, the racial agenda, and all that. So you probably touched on that idea, like so starting from the idea of madness, the romantic idea of flashing eyes and floating ears, and then you went to the Enlightenment logic and all that. So that's why I was thinking that how the virus is actually redefining the space, and the previous question that Monisha asked in terms of nature. So if the vector was a bat, we encroached upon the natural landscape, and nature is hitting back and forcing us to cocoon in our own personal space. Yep. So are we entering this Adorno Horkheimer kind of pre-enlightenment mythic zone or not?
I feel that we are still in this debate between science and I don't know what to call it, non-science, but I think the scientific discourse is the winning discourse. I still feel, maybe I'm being very, very modernist in my approach, and I feel it is winning, and that's going to be the discourse that will dominate. It is the social structures that will have to be reformed and rethought. Yeah. Good to see you.
Can I come in here?
Like,
I think Shamshad, yeah, and I think I'm with those here. I mean, this whole thing about science versus, the Enlightenment versus, whatever postmodern thought. A lot of this is really an artificial sort of opposition, because the Enlightenment is still there, has always been there in the world of science. So if you're doing science, hard science, so you are within that paradigm. And I mean, with the virus, the question of ignoring science does not arise at all, because the most successful ways of dealing with the virus have been through the use of science and social engineering in East Asia, you see, and where the West has really shown its weakness. So I don't think we should see an opposition here. And as for the, a lot of this about Trump is, and the new normal. Trump as the new normal, I think it really, we entering another realm, really. I mean, the realm of right-wing politics, you know, and how that has sort of come into the mainstream of America. And I think that has really introduced a new element which has not yet played itself out. So in fact, it'll be very interesting to see how the Biden presidency plays out. I mean, in the 4 years after which Biden will not be able to stand for re-election, and Trump seems determined to carry on his campaign. He has his fanatical supporters, and so I mean, it's a situation that we are very familiar with. So you have a party which is in power, and the other party refuses to accept the election. And so,
yeah, but I also see the Trump phenomenon not just as a basket of deplorables or whatever Hillary Clinton called them, but as something that rationally works in the way that a certain class, a certain way of thinking has alienated itself from the real lives of people, and we are cut off. So people find ways of expression that can be very inimical, can be very retrograde, but there is a logic to it. It's not outside logic.
no, of course. I mean, there's a logic to fascism and there's a logic to Nazism as well. So yeah, I mean, no question about that. To come back to the question of the norm, and I think, I mean, you know, it's really very simple in the sense that if you use the word norm, the word abnormal automatically, you know, comes into play. And how do the question of defining the boundaries arises. And this is an ongoing thing. And in the way technology is affecting our lives now, this was written about even before the pandemic by this chap, Yuval Noah, when he says that, you know, our minds are being hacked by the new technology, you know? So we are actually, and in other words, we are helpless. I mean, your computer, I mean, as soon as you go into the internet, the internet knows what your taste is, how you might vote, etc., etc., and your mind is no longer your own. And yet, I mean, that is not entirely true. I mean, this is just a new form of the old question of how you assert your individual creative intelligence. And Noah personally has done that through Vipassana meditation. And I find it very interesting that the way he explains, you know, and the whole idea behind Buddhist meditation, behind Vipassana meditation is, and here I also see a connection with Nietzsche, when Nietzsche says, don't react, you know, because something happens and you react. You are actually locked into this, you know, action-reaction sort of pattern. So in Vipassana meditation, you observe the mind, you don't allow this samskara, sanskar, to build up within you, so that whenever you have a sensation, you react automatically. In other words, create a space within your mind where you can think for yourself. In other words, this is actually another way of developing the critical mind. So if the critical mind can be developed, any attempt to hack your mind will fail. And so I think that is a sort of window of hope, as it were, in relation to the way the new technology is trying to, you know, invade our minds, as it were.
But even in much more lay terms, little things like Arifa's cooking, like my gardening, these are the places where your mind is not being hacked, I hope. I don't know, maybe it is.
Well, I mean, everyday life, I think, will always give us opportunities to, do little things where we affirm our freedom. I mean, I think ultimately, I think I'm still an old existentialist. Man is free. You are not free in a vacuum. You are free in a situation. And whatever the situation is, you have the ability to exercise your freedom. A lot of things came up in your talk, which I found very interesting. You did mention poetry, and I think a lot of modern poetry is about the normal and the abnormal. And if you go, not only the contemporary poets like Lowell and Plath, but going back, I mean, among the modernists, H.D. Hilda Doolittle is a fascinating figure, And so even Robert Frost, who is idolized by the Americans as, the great American mainstream poet, he's actually, he's full of confessional stuff. I mean, he himself was a victim of clinical depression. His family had suicides, and it's a terrible story. And they all find their way into the poetry. And then this raises another sort of question, regarding this whole debate of this Foucauldian discourse of normality and abnormality. That there are aspects of the mind which really are beyond our control. Somebody who's a victim of clinical depression or bipolar disorder or schizophrenia, is in a state where psychoanalysis cannot help that person. And there has to be, other kinds of intervention. So there are, I think, limits to the, psychoanalytic discourse, which are very real, I think. And because a lot of the problems which people face and which we come across even in our professional life, have to do with situations which, just plain counseling cannot really do much good. Another thing about someone brought in romanticism and nature, which I found very interesting also. Aldous Huxley has a fascinating essay, Wordsworth in the Tropics, where he says that it was possible for Wordsworth to be a nature worshipper because he was living in the temperate zone, and that it's not possible to be Wordsworthian in the tropics. Now, when he wrote it, he had his reasons, but I think the situation after everything that has happened, with over the last 100 years is such that you have to be Wordsworthian in the tropics, because the tropical rainforest is the last reservoir of hope, really. And we actually have a literary tradition also, which goes back, to the Beat poets and the other poets of the 60s, who, the ones who dropped out of mainstream American life and took up Eastern mysticism and, Zen Buddhism, and tried to live with nature. So you see, this is a tradition that is, I think, still that is of great relevance today, as we try to work out lifestyles that are, healthier, more, let's say, eco-friendly. So we can be Wordsworth. Sorry?
Right, sir. So Jacqueline has an interesting question about the frontliners. Ma'am, can you respond to that?
Where?
From Jacqueline Jessica Gomes.
With the corona hitting every corner,
I don't know whether
every classes differently,
you know,
suffered most inequalities and injured.
I know.
Yeah.
You know, even when we were saluting our frontliners, it was always the doctors, hardly ever the other health workers. So I am hoping that, as I keep on saying, that I'm hoping that the corona situation will bring us closer to each other, will bring us into thinking about others, because we are all in the same situation as far as the corona is concerned. But of course, the structures, the social structures and divisions, the gender divisions will not go away just like that. We will have to work towards it as well. And questions like these really bring it home how differentiated, gender and social differentiated we are. Yeah, I think it will if we allow it to, if we make it to. I think there's a lot in this situation that will bring about the new normal, and the new normal doesn't have to be the Trumpian new normal. It has to be that more meditative, personal new normal at the personal level, at the social level, to make use or to bring about more solidarity as we are all in it together. This is the most difficult one to attain, I think. And the third thing is that, you know, science, I don't know, because maybe I'm so dependent on the computer today that I feel that science is the way forward, that we will have to re-establish some kind of, you know, rationality, scientific thinking, etc. But then, as Kasser pointed out, we still need to have that space where our mind is our own. And I think we'll all be able to search for those spaces. We have enough time. Corona is giving us that.
I think that beautifully also answered the next question that Mahfouz asked. This related question, I think you've already answered that.
Okay, Mahfouz, how are you?
Well, it's about the politics of vaccine, so maybe.
Yeah. We don't know about the politics of vaccine, but yeah, but if even in the developed countries, if the frontliners and the more vulnerable people get it first, wow, that's a big step forward. But let's see what happens. I don't think we need the vaccine. We'll be over it. I'm being Trumpian here.
So I think we can round up here. We don't have any more questions, I guess. We have another last question from Deep again.
Before calling off Tabassum, I would like you to explain for everyone integration.
Sorry, ma'am? Curriculum integration?
Yeah, I want to know more about it.
Oh,
it's
okay.
A new concept.
All right, so we have been doing it. This is our third curriculum integration, third attempt at curriculum integration. What we try to do here at DEH is that we try to integrate all the courses through a theme. So all the courses offered in a semester, they engage with this theme, and this theme is not taught in class. So this is a sort of a learning beyond the classroom. And so we bring in external, resource people like yourself, and also we take part in it. So students throughout the semester basically work on these, theme, and they try to kind of from all all streams, linguistics, literature, cultural studies alike. So what they do is that they try to kind of, dissect this. They try to use theoretical lens to understand some problem, which could be literary, which could be of other natures. So towards the end, they produce something. We have projects, final projects, which I'll be very happy to.
So good to see some of our colleagues from BRAC. Okay, so yeah.
Yeah, ma'am joined. Yes.
So hello to everyone. And all that. So Tabassum, yeah, carry on. Tabassum, can you hear me?
Now I can, sir. So should I continue? I can't hear her though. Or let me just finish what I was saying about the curriculum integration, if she can hear us. So it's a kind of a, an effort from the department to integrate all the streams and also to train our students to use critical analysis more. So give them ample chances beyond the classroom to practice that. So this theme actually unifies in that sense. That's why curriculum integration. Thank you so much. I will hand it over to Shamshad sir now for the concluding remarks. Shamshad sir.
But I think ma'am got cut off again. I can see her. Is she there?
No, she's not here. No, she's gone again. So I think we should just finish this. What an end.
Okay, all right. All right, so this can be an in absentia thanks, I suppose. So I wish ma'am was here. Should we wait?
No, she said that she's not being able to connect, so we can actually wrap. Yeah, she sends her apologies.
Okay, great. So that makes my life easier. So I would like to thank Firdous ma'am for the wonderful session. This is the second one that we had, and for those of ULAB. So this CI forum, this is for the third time we are doing it. So the idea is to integrate, something that we do not teach at a department level or while doing our regular courses. So basically, this is a platform where all the students can come together and then they can showcase their talent while working on a project on a given theme. And the themes are usually elaborated by research persons. They can be both in-house or, so we can outsource the resources as well. But this time we had Dr. Asfar Hussain doing the first plenary. Then we have, Professor Firdous Azim. And after this, individual course teacher will, talk about projects that are in tandem with their courses. For example, for my romantic poetry class, maybe we will talk about the apocalyptic fear, and how this was considered kind of a new normal. So in the late 18th century and early 19th century. So, or the rise of technology and so on. So when Professor was talking about how technology is invading our space, and with the rise of the fourth industrial revolution, technology has become part of our everyday existence. Say my phone is actually a prosthetic cell. So it is actually an extended organ that I have now. So when I carry my phone, on my palm, so it becomes my eyes and ears to see the world, to make sense of the world, to Google everything, to learn about things. So it is an extension of my brain because it has artificial memory in it. So I do not have to memorize the, timetables anymore. So that is new normal. So in postmodernism, so we teach our students, so whether things are social construct or not. Somehow this pandemic has taught us to go back to the basic. It has exposed the vulnerabilities that we had as a race, as a species, as an institution, as a family. So when the global north is accumulating all the access to vaccines, so in Canada, if you remember, AstraZeneca ordered 9 vaccines, whereas for Bangladesh's 160 million people, we don't have a single vaccine ordered yet. So the global north and the global south, so they are at odds with one another. So we keep on saying that we are in it, so together, but then again, we are not. We are doing this self-isolation. We are wearing a physical mask. We are wearing a metaphorical mask. So Avrat Bashini mentioned by Firdous ma'am. So yes, it is an apt metaphor of our current existence. We can be Zen Buddha, as Kaisa sir was saying, so to have kind of a creative resistance, to fight back against technology. We can be aware of the K economy, in which 5 companies are controlling 80% of the global finance. So there are so many things happening, and the only way we can survive is by being aware of it, by critically engaging with it. So it's very important for our students, for our colleagues to be alive. We are lucky to be alive, but at the same time, we need to be alive in our senses. And that's exactly what this curriculum integration is all about. So thank you so much for joining in. Thank you for your enthusiasm. I know for many of our students, so the midterm begins on Sunday, or for the masters, maybe tonight. So again, not normal to have a session right before your meet, but there you have it. Thank you so much. Take care, everyone.
So thank you, sir. Thank you so much. I think that brings us to the end of the session. I look forward to having all of you join us for the final exhibit. I will be communicating the details to you closer to the date. Thank you so much. Have a very good afternoon. Bye.